Welcome, everyone.
Yeah.
Little issues like the trash, homeless camps.
Yeah, they're just letting people in. We're up to 53 already. We had almost 200 the other day.
Greetings, voters. Hello, hello.
Hello and welcome. And then Will Dare, I just want to remind you that as the host, you can mute people.
Yeah, you can mute everybody. That would be good.
Okay.
We will trust.
Mute.
Mute everybody. We can unmute.
So I've gone ahead and muted everybody, which means, Teresa, you'll want to unmute yourself.
Thank you.
And our other speakers will want to unmute themselves.
I was just going to listen to this Zoom thing while I did work.
Rosa, I'm going to mute you. So Will, I'm counting on you to help me with the muting as necessary. And welcome everyone. If you're just joining us, you're joining the Lower Columbia Canoe Club's safety talk tonight. We'll get started in just a few minutes. We have a lot of people trying to get in out of the waiting room into the presentation, so we'll just give it a few more minutes. But welcome. You're in the right place. And excuse me for 1 second, get my phone. Again, welcome if you're just joining us for the Lower Columbia Canoe Club's conversation tonight on risk, fear, and flow. I'm here for the flow part.
Yeah.
I'm excited. If you're just joining us for the first time, maybe perhaps this is your first safety talk with the Lower Columbia Canoe Club. Well, first I should say I'm Deborah Kane. I'm the president of the Lower Columbia Canoe Club, and this is our second safety talk in a 5-part series. So if you're just logging into the safety series on talk number 2, fear not. The safety talks are recorded, and all of the recordings for the safety talks are posted on the Lower Columbia Canoe Club's website. And when I finish saying hello and getting you oriented and introduced, I'm going to post a few things in the chat so you know how to keep in touch with us should you wish to continue on in the safety series. In addition to the safety series, the Lower Columbia Canoe Club also hosts a series of what we call takeout talks, and which are on a variety of topics. Last week we had a takeout talk on breaking down scary rapids with Sage Donnelly. So for those of you that joined us for that talk last week, I just wanted to let folks know that the recording, as well as a blog post from last week's talk with Sage Donnelly on breaking down scary rapids, is also now posted on the Lower Columbia Canoe Club's website. And again, I'll post a link in the chat in just a sec. And what else? Oh, I mentioned this is part 2 in a 5-part series. What's up next, Teresa? The next one is shoulders.
Yeah, shoulders is next. And,
shoulders, and then we go from shoulders, we go to winter paddling. And from winter paddling, we go to the Grand Canyon. So you've got some images just to center you in what's coming up in the rest of the safety series. And then in the takeout talks, we've got one next week on progression, how to know, when and if it's time to step it up or maybe step it back, depending on what's going on for you in your paddling. We've also got one coming up on diversifying paddle sports. We've got a gear talk coming up with the pros. So again, all this information is posted on the website. Encourage you to check it out. And if I haven't already said, and I know that I didn't, I forgot, the Lower Columbia Canoe Club has the word canoe in it. But we are a recreational paddling club. I'd say about half of our members are canoeists, and another half are hardshell kayakers. We also have a bunch of folks that, will go down the river in SUPs or IKs. So broadly speaking, the Lower Columbia Canoe Club is a recreational paddling club. We're based in Portland, Oregon. We have access to some of the most amazing whitewater and just moving water in the country. So we're very blessed in that regard. And honestly, we have sort of taken the lemon situation of COVID and we've made lemonade. We have been putting on more online programming in the last 18 months because of COVID than the club has ever done in the past. And what that means is that increasingly our membership is not just limited to people who are in the Pacific Northwest. So if you're joining us tonight from Canada or from North Carolina, anywhere throughout the United States and even internationally, we have international members these days. Please, please, please consider joining the club. Membership is $25. I'm going to post the link in the chat. And the reason I have this canoe on the screen is because at the end of January, on January 31st, January is always our big membership drive month. Anybody who's a current member of the Lower Columbia Canoe Club will have their name entered in a raffle, and we're raffling off this canoe as well as a bunch of other prizes that are relevant to you, whether you're a hard-shell kayaker or a person on a SUP or whatever. So that's my pitch. Join the club if you enjoyed tonight's talk. Your support helps us put on these talks. And with that, I want to introduce Teresa Gryder. And one day, Teresa, you'll have to tell me if you like this photo that I keep using of you.
That's terrible.
Well, but you're smiling and you're in your book. Teresa Gryder is the safety chair of the Lower Columbia Canoe Club. She is the woman, the force, the brains, the inspiration behind the safety series. She put on the 5-part safety series last year, and recordings from that are posted online that you could watch last year's talk. And it was so successful. She, of course, is putting it on again this year. And I think it's going to be an annual thing as long as Teresa's willing to do it for us. So with that, Teresa, do you want to introduce your panelists? And I will share the screen with you.
Okay. Well, we can just be faces for a little while.
And we can be faces, for sure.
Just for a little while.
Let's do it.
Hi, everybody. I'm Teresa Gryder, and I got into this whole paddling thing as a child. I've been doing it for a long time. And at some point in my paddling career, I became a raft guide, and I discovered that there's a lot of dangerous stuff about rivers, and I started to study on it. And safety became a primary mission of mine after many things that happened in the course of my years on the water. And so now I'm the safety chair for the Lower Columbia Canoe Club. I'm also a naturopathic doctor here in Portland. And I have today a panel of amazing people who also share my fascination and obsession really with safety in whitewater river running. First up is going to be Rainey Hoffman, and he's an attorney, and he's there with the fluorescent lights over his head. Very, very poor image, but he's going to be talking to us about risk, and he knows a thing or two about risk. And then next up will be Lee Baker, who recently started a new business, I believe, isn't it a new business, Gradient River Essentials?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
new.
where you're teaching kayaking and swiftwater rescue and whatnot, on top of being a school counselor, so he knows a thing or two about psychology. And then also with us today is Darryl with the books behind him and the big hair. Yep, that's Darryl. And he's our representative poet. He years ago wrote something for his children to try to explain why he goes and does this apparently crazy whitewater stuff. And so at some point we will get to hear Darryl's poem that he wrote for his children, and probably some other comments along the way.
About flow.
Flow? Oh yeah, that's me. I got fascinated with flow a long time ago, but then a couple weeks ago, as we were planning this talk, Lee said, hey, you should read this book. And I started reading it, and I was like, oh, this is definitely going in the talk, because it follows. It's risk. You get afraid, and then if you manage to get past your fear, then you can find the flow and function in spite of it. And so that became one of the 3 main subjects of this talk. And there are a lot of ways to approach the flow. It doesn't have to be through boating, but we're talking about boating here, so that's what we'll do. I have a few requests. One is that you keep yourself muted unless you're going to speak. Write your questions or comments in the chat, and then we can figure out if we're going to respond right away or later. We will make the slides from the images that I'm going to show, and the notes will be available later. So you don't have to worry about getting a screenshot of it or whatever. You can get the whole thing. And that's it. Anything to add, you guys, for a general overview? No? Okay. Let's see. Let me get this going. I'll show you some pictures. Risk, fear, and flow in whitewater. Here's my speakers. All the faces are obscuring Darryl over there on the far right side. Can you guys see Darryl running that waterfall? It's gorilla over there. Can't seem to make it go away. Oh well. Here's hoping you guys can see more than I can. And here's an overview of what we're going to cover. How many people actually watched the Alpinist? Hey, can you do surveys on the fly? No? Well, I'm curious to know how many people actually did.
I'll work on it, T.
Okay, thanks. And onward, here's what it looks like on Netflix right now. So heading on, after watching The Alpinist, I was thinking about, well, okay, who takes this kind of a risk and why? And really, you first have to understand risk. And Rainey is somewhere out there, and he has some thoughts about risk for us.
Yes. Hey, Teresa. Hey, everybody. Thanks for the invitation again. It was super fun doing this last year when we kind of mostly focused on heuristics or heuristic traps, sort of shortcut decision making that can lead us to bad decision making, which we'll touch on a little bit. But I think this year is going to be a little more fun because we've got flow and fear involved as well. Teresa mentioned I'm a paddler and also a lawyer, and I've come to realize that those two are pretty connected by risk. In fact, as a business lawyer, I've realized my role is kind of more of a risk advisor, where I basically explain risk to my clients and allow them to make informed risk and reward decisions. And I think that's very similar for kayaking. Kind of the goal is to have fun, and to do that, you need to make accurate risk assessments. So I think my portion of the talk is going to be focused on decision making with risk and some of the underlying science behind risk. And I think I'm going to make the case. This probably comes into the Marc-Andres slides later on, but better does not necessarily mean less risk. That's the controversial seed I'll plant in the beginning here.
Better skills.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So starting off, like, what is risk? We talk about risk all the time. What exactly is this thing that we talk about and deal with on a day-to-day basis and all the time when we're on a river? Let me start with sort of the actuarial definition. So when you talk to someone who does this for a living and models insurance, they'll say, risk is an event that causes a loss. And so when you think about that definition, it kind of breaks down into two vectors: the probability of an event happening and the magnitude of the loss when that event does happen. So you think about, how does this apply to boating? Well, when you look at your scouting a rapid, what's the probability of making an error, not hitting your line? And then what are the consequences if you miss your line? And I think when we think about risk in these two vectors, it sort of allows you to be a little more analytical about the risk you're taking and the objective risk itself. For example, if you're unfamiliar with a run or having a bad day, there's a higher probability of error. And if you're on a very remote river or far from a road, those are higher consequences if a mistake is made. So the point I'm trying to make is more kind of accurately evaluating risk essentially leads to better outcomes, better lines through rapids, better trips, safer trips. And that naturally leads to the question, how do you get better at risk assessment? I think it really comes down to getting more data. So having more experience, getting some more direct knowledge, obviously, always good. Getting more indirect knowledge. So talks like this, talking to people who are familiar with the run, reading accident reports and debriefing after a run, talking about what went well on the trip, what could have gone better. Super. The other concepts that I think are super important that are related to risk are risk tolerance and risk mitigation. So risk tolerance is accepting basically your willingness to accept an outcome of a bad event. And I'd make the argument that most whitewater boaters that I know, and certainly myself, I think they consider themselves low risk persons, which is sort of at odds with how the media portrays a lot of outdoor adventure sports. It's considered, quote, risky. But I personally have a very low, even though I've run some difficult rapids in my life, I have a very low risk tolerance. I'll never run anything if I think I have, more than a 6 sigma chance of failure. Essentially high levels of skill and experience allow you to keep that risk low. They allow you to reduce the probability of the error. Even as you get more accomplished and you start running more difficult and more remote rivers, the consequences go up. So you can essentially mitigate your own risk by increasing your skill and ability and knowledge. I think it'll be very interesting, Teresa, when we talk about Marc-Andres and sort of the Alpinist, and so the natural question is, was Marc-Andres recklessly rolling the dice when he climbed these mixed medium mountains, with the ice is melting and he's, having to climb on bare rock and ice, and he's doing it by himself with no rope? Or is he just sort of next level good? And he, his risk tolerance was sort of adequately framed with the, he basically had no lack. He basically didn't think that he was actually going to fail. I'm in the camp that I think he was just next level good. I don't think he was necessarily reckless. He was certainly taking on incredibly, difficult activities. But I think, when Alex Hanold free soloed El Capitan, I really think he wouldn't have done it if he didn't have a 6 sigma certainty of success. The other concept that's sort of related to risk tolerance is mitigation. How do you mitigate the risk? And I think we, as when you're on a trip with others, you think about this all the time. Should we set safety below a drop if there's, a bad run out of a rapid? If you're on a class 3 river that's got a class 4 rapid, you can mitigate the risk of running that river by portaging the drops that you're not up for that day. So that's essentially that slide T. If you can move the next one.
Okay.
Normalization of deviance. So this is a concept we covered last year. It's a kind of a social science concept that's been adapted to outdoor sports, and I've kind of borrowed this shamelessly from the backcountry skier Cody Townsend, for those of you who know who he is. So it's essentially defined as the increasing and most likely unknowing acceptance of risk. Once you or your group get away with kind of a good outcome, like no one getting hurt, after making a bad risk decision, in other words, one that's outside of your risk tolerance. And there's a great quote that I think this comes from Cody Townsend, which is, "The lack of tangible consequences from experiences in the backcountry can shape our decision-making towards more risky behavior until catastrophic consequences occur." Mm-hmm. So trying to think about, common examples of this. For me, it's you scout a rapid, you pick your line and you mess up, but you live anyway, or you don't get hurt and nothing happens. And sort of gradually you start to sort of that bad risk decision, you sort of didn't accurately assess your skills or accurately assess the difficulty of the rapid. Now it's like, oh, maybe the rapid's not as difficult as I thought it was, or maybe my skills are up to the task. And that's sort of that your risk tolerance is sort of unknowingly getting expanded and you're accepting more risk. So essentially risky behavior is normalized if the negative consequences don't occur.
And the deviance is from your own risk tolerance.
Exactly. Yeah. And actually the next, T, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide. So this, again, this is borrowed shamelessly from Cody Townsend. There, picture on the left, shows, well, the circles show kind of the objective levels of risk that are out in the world. Extreme on the edge, the red, considerable, the yellow, and then the green, low risk, objective risk. If your risk tolerance is, hey, I'm a low risk person, then you're operating within that initial circle. But once sort of behavior, once you sort of get away with something in the backcountry, you're actually unknowingly have expanded your risk tolerance, and you're now exposing yourself to greater risk, even though you didn't think you were. So to me, the question naturally arises, how do you overcome deviance? How do you overcome not breaking, not accepting more risk than you think you are? One way to do it is to have kind of rules that you focus on that you never break. Like, I'll never put on a river without a throw bag. Or for myself personally, I'll test myself as I'm going down the river doing kind of class 5 moves and very, low consequence class 2 whitewater. And if I'm not hitting my moves, then, I honestly have to do an honest assessment on myself. Am I up for running more difficult water that day? So I think it's really key to kind of collect data.
Looking at this graphic, it occurs to me that Marc-Andre's risk tolerance probably went all the way into the red. He as much as said he was willing to die.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there he is.
I gotta interject briefly, Rich, because another way that you've prevented it, Rich was in the club that I learned in, is 3 years ahead of me, a very long time ago. We always just made sure at our club that whenever we made bad decisions, we actually had bad consequences. So we
What was
learned.
the punishment?
Sorry, just trying to inject a little humor, Rich.
Remind me what that was, Darryl. My memory is faded.
Oh man, you don't get me started. Like the time that we thought it was a good idea to put on the river with 1 leader with no helmet, 1 leader with no paddle.
No, the consequences, not the bad decisions.
Oh,
I remember those.
getting lost in the wilderness for after dark, getting cold, getting
Yeah.
hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Having to talk to Brian Kuntz, explain ourselves. College risk management officer. I'll butt out here.
So
Oh,
Teresa,
yeah.
I'll turn it over to you to take the Marc-Andre slides, and I'll interject
okay.
if I have anything valuable.
Well, I just pulled this quote out of the movie because I watched the whole thing again. And unfortunately, I can't see all of my own screen. So I'm hoping someone else will read the quote. Every time you go to the mountains.
It could be your last time. So all these things you love, you have to appreciate. Whatever dinner you'd want to be your last dinner, you have to eat it because you're going to the mountains.
Remember that in the movie, and he had that fancy dessert. And then it was this totally other conversation when he said to me, it's not an unacceptable risk, the fact that he might not come back from the mountains. So he knew it and he accepted it. And people are angry at him for having such an extreme risk tolerance, but that's really what was extreme about him, aside from his skills. And then this next quote's a good one from Alex Honnold. He was like the free solo climber at Yosemite that came before Marc-Andre. And would somebody read his quote?
If you fall and die, everybody thinks you're an idiot. If you succeed, then everybody celebrates you as a big hero. But the reality is that you are the same person either way.
Yeah. And Marc-Andre would be the same person if he were alive today, hopefully. The same goofy guy. Oh, this was put in for you, Rainey. Or what is it?
Hey, Rainey, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
I think you kind of touched on this a little bit. And I think you said something about it. How does your critical self-assessment of your skills impact risk? How would you answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of the integral part of an accurate risk assessment. So kind of the premise I'm trying to establish is doing an accurate risk assessment of your skills vis-a-vis the environment is sort of how you increase safety and have more fun. The question is, how do you accurately assess your skills? And I think that's a great segue into these heuristics, because that's very difficult. It's very difficult to accurately self-assess your skills. And there are a lot of kind of a short, what we call system one thinking that gets in the way of accurate assessment. So let me sort of segue into this heuristic concept. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. He kind of outlines two different systems of thinking. System one thinking, which is fast and intuitive, and which we use, thousands of times a day to get through the day. And system two thinking, which is slow and analytical. System one thinking isn't necessarily bad, but if you rely on it, it can cause you to make bad decisions, because you're relying on this mental shortcut to make a decision, and you're not allowing yourself to take in more data to make a more accurate decision about risk or the factors or your abilities. And so that's when, the heuristic can become a quote trap. It leads to a bad risk decision, either outside our risk tolerance, or we're overestimating our skills or underestimating the danger. It causes to ignore data and facts. So again, the goal is to become aware of these traps. Part of our talk last year was kind of more oriented towards these heuristic traps. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. But the concept is just being aware of these traps and these mental shortcuts will allow you to make a more accurate risk decision on the river. By the way, I should mention that this was, Teresa and I were inspired by this. I took an avalanche class a year ago, and backcountry skiing community is very advanced in terms of these quote unquote human factors in safety. When I took this avalanche class, I thought it would all be about snow crystals and snow science, and it was mostly about human decision-making with risk, and how to deal with uncertainty and these psychological factors. And for those of you that want to geek out on the subject, the seminal article is written by a researcher named Ian McCammon, in an article called "Heuristic Traps in Recreational Avalanche Accidents: Evidence and Implications." And let me just read one quote, which I think it kind of summarizes the article. "When certain psychological cues are present, people find it difficult to heed more objective cues about the hazard. These psychological cues have very little to do with conditions and a lot to do with our unconscious assumptions, biases, and habits." So this is a kind of a short list, and I'm just going to run through these quickly so we can move on to more exciting topics like flow. But these are kind of a list of common heuristic traps that we all have fallen into, either on the river or off. The first one, familiarity. So, essentially the heuristic is you're traveling on a familiar river and you expect, familiar environments to be safer and to behave in the same way they have in the past. The trap is becoming complacent when you're on the river and underestimating the risk or not paying attention to changing conditions. So, running a rapid that you've run 1,000 times before without scouting it, because you assume there's not going to be a log stuck in the obvious spot that a log would collect. The next one is acceptance. There's a deep wired human desire to be accepted, especially by people that we like or respect, and that leads us to engage in activities that will get us noticed or accepted. And the trap is that it causes us to overlook warning signs and take greater risks. You're kind of peer pressure. You're running a rapid that everyone else has. Consistency and commitment. These are kind of related concepts. The consistency heuristic is making decisions. It's easier to make decisions if you maintain consistency with a prior decision that you've made. So there's a powerful bias for sticking with what we've already decided, unless there's a very compelling reason to change. So it's kind of a stay the course impulse. The trap is obviously you've made a decision, you're not changing, but you're not taking in new information that clearly shows the decision to be riskier. Commitment is sort of a related concept. It's sort of related to this concept of a sunk cost, money that you've invested in an endeavor that can't be recovered. And again, the trap is it causes you to ignore facts. So, this river never runs. Here I am at the put in, and I know there have been a massive windstorm the week before with I've heard about evidence of strainers, but you decided to put on anyway because, well, it's really rare to get on this one river. Expert halo. This is a very common one. Trusting a leader and sort of turning off your own critical thinking because, hey, I'm just going to put defer my decision making to someone who is a better boater than I am. That person could have a very different risk tolerance, or may not, be looking out necessarily. May not have an ill will, but just isn't really focused on how you're doing that particular day, or your ability level, or your desire.
Or your expert might fall into a heuristic trap.
Exactly. Tracks or scarcity. This is, I think I kind of already covered this. This is, wanting to. You value opportunities greater in proportion to the chance that you may lose them. So this is getting on the river that runs rarely. Social facilitation. This is doing something to impress people. Humans we're social creatures. Everyone else ran the rapid, I should be fine.
It's going to look great on Facebook.
Yeah. Social proof. Again, if other people are doing it, it's desirable and safe to do it. The risky shift, if people are together, you assume, that if you're in a group, you basically will assume more risk than you would do it alone. Availability, let's see what this one is. Teresa, do you remember what availability is?
Yeah.
I do. I put this in when I adopted some facets into some whitewater. I included this in mine for a good reason. We only know what we know, and we seem to think we know everything as boaters. So there's always 1,000 more ways to do something, but we have limited availability on what we can come up with for a solution. So we tend to trust what we know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we fail to ask, what don't we know? And that's the trap. Because if you ask, what don't we know about this? What are the unknowns? What are the uncertainties? Then that guides you in a new direction.
Yeah, and these last two are sort of self-explanatory.
Right? Yeah. Oh, look, we're on to fear. Oh, I'm supposed to cover this first slide. Hi. So looking at that photograph of that guy, how could anybody paddle over that and not be afraid? But fear is a lot of different things. It's an emotion, right? You feel it in your gut, you know it in your head, but there's other aspects to it. For example, in this innate or instinctive fear, they did a study where they took baby monkeys that had never seen a snake, and they kept them, in a safe environment for a whole year until they were, like adolescent monkeys. And then they showed them snakes, and they were terrified. And they know that from the body language tells you the primate fear. So primates are afraid of snakes having never seen one. That's not learned, that's innate. But you can also learn to be afraid of something. Like, for example, you try to run a rapid and bad things happen. It might be a rapid that you're perfectly capable of running and that normally you would be able to run, but something just went wrong that one time. But it's hard to get past that fear because you learn it. It's learned fear. Fear is a hormonal or a neuroendocrine state, which you guys know the fight, flight, or freeze set of options. When you're really, really scared, that's all you can do. You don't really have the cognitive ability to think hard about anything. So you have to actually calm down in order to be able to think. And, it takes thinking to not get caught in heuristic traps, because the heuristic traps are where you automatically go when your thinking is a little blurry. So, and the last item on this list, that fear is a precursor to flow. The very first hormone or neuro transmitter in the list of neurotransmitters that happen when you're in flow is norepinephrine, and it's a fear hormone. And what it does is it drives you to pay attention, sit up, take notice. This is real. This is serious. You guys recognize this rapid?
Gosh, it's awfully dark in here. Did Sonny go out?
No, he is.
I know that rapid. Who is that in that picture?
I don't know. It's from Northwest Rafting Company. I stole their photo. Thank you very much. It's beautiful.
Okay. Well, I can confirm as of Sunday, the rapid is still there and looking real good. That is Greenwall on the Illinois. Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Lee. I'm from Eugene, Oregon, the whitewater capital of Oregon. Woo woo. Are we having fun yet? Okay. I also want to give a quick shout out because no one said it yet. Teresa works really hard on these, and I have had a blast tuning in. And so it's an honor to get to come and share with you guys a little bit. My part's kind of short and sweet, but I always like to tell a story if I can to make a couple of points. Are you ready? Here we go. Two kayakers. That sounds like a joke. Sounds like the start of a joke.
Walked
Two
into a
kayakers
bar.
get up in the morning and they're going to join a group. They both take the time to learn about the river. They take the time to communicate with the group. They pack a nice lunch that has lots of calories for them. They are hydrated. They didn't drink too much beer the night before. They take time to load the boat on the car. They burn some gas. They partner up and carpool to the put-in. And they have a river that's within a normal range they're going to run. And they have a nice team meeting before they launch to talk about the day. They go through a great safety talk and make sure that everyone's on the same page. And the day that is waiting for them for this group has, kind of a crux rapid in it. And it's just a little ways into the trip. And these two boaters get to the crux rapid. The team decides they should scout because that's a good idea because it has some complex moves in it and a couple of, I'd say, key paddle strokes. And they walk down the rapid together and they all agree on who maybe will go first, how rescue is going to be set up. Okay. So in some ways we're going to get on this topic of fear in a minute. So they're doing some real nice things to try and help the experience for everybody to have a good partnership with fear in a minute. But the two people have a different story from this point on. The first person, let's call her Teresa, just randomly. So Teresa decides, I'm going to take my time walking back up the rapid, and I'm going to continue to keep breathing. I'm not going to go quick back to my boat because I'm going to be out of breath when I get there, jumping over boulders and logs and stuff. And going to look at rapids from the evaluation of like, what strokes would I take, in this place, and where do I need to be at this point in the river? And this drop kind of has what you call like 3 progressively harder moves in it. And there's like a setup, and then there's a move to the center. And then there's a pretty key stroke to make a boof move over a hole. And she's identified in her risk management that the hole is probably the crux of the run. And she, instead of thinking about the worst thing that can happen to her, she decides to focus on the most common thing to happen to her if she were to make a mistake. Now, she acknowledges that there's risk involved in paddling, and that includes our lives, our livelihood. There's risk on the drive there too. But she decides if she is going to focus on anything, the most likely thing would be a swim if she didn't make a boof stroke. Okay, so that helps a little bit for her to partner with this fear, and keeps moving up the river to get back to her boat. And she decides, you know what? I'm going to try and make sure my body and my mind and my emotion and my whole experience is just ready to go for this rapid. I deserve that as a paddler. I know exactly why I'm here. I'm here to kind of find how far I can take myself in this partnership with fear. I don't want to go past the point where it's uncomfortable, but it's a little bit uncomfortable at this moment as she's getting ready to get in her boat. And so she stands there and she takes a nice big breath. And then she checks in with herself. And you might call this, some people call it mindfulness or a spiritual moment, or this kind of, I'm going to make sure my body is going to perform its very best. And she does something I'll do in counseling sometimes to help kids come out of like a crisis state. A lot of you probably heard it. It's like a 4, 3, 2, 1. And they can mean different things, but it's pretty common that she might find 4 things to focus on quickly. And between each one, she might take a deep breath. So she notices a large fir tree and how massive the base is. Nice deep breath. She notices the clarity of the water. Nice deep breath. Okay. Finds a couple other neat things. She maybe sees the colorful PFD of her buddy coming up behind her up the river. Nice deep breath. Okay. She goes on to 3 things that she feels. She wiggles her toes inside of her wool sock in the dry suit. She feels her fingertips together with moisture from, the rain, deep breaths in between. 2 more things she hears, another one of our senses. She hears obviously the river roaring, but then she also hears a voice, or maybe she hears a bird, or maybe she, so then one last thing is the 1, 4, 3, 2, 1. One is, in this case, why am I here? And so for a paddler to know why you are here in this partnership with fear, I think becomes really important to work with this fear, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And for me, and I think for a lot of paddlers, and I can't speak for everyone, we go out into an environment, and I hesitate to use the word test ourselves. Some people do, but I want to experience the power of this world we live in nature, in one of its raw sense, in a river. And I want to see what I can experience with this relationship with fear. And I want to perform physically, and I want to perform mentally. I want to keep my stuff together, because I think for me, I come out here so I can go back to the world and be my best person, because this is a big challenge out here. So then Teresa gets back in her boat. She takes one more breath, and she visualizes the entire rapid as she remembered it on the Scout, where she's going to make the move and maybe flick her hip, where she's going to take a stroke to get across the river to center herself, how she's going to dip the edge, rotate the core, pop that stroke in for a big boof, and away she goes. She's ready. She's partnering with this fear. She's not trying to conquer it. She's not trying to run through it. She's working with it, and she feels herself calm. She runs the rapid beautifully. She hits the boof, splats out. Everybody says, Yahoo. Here comes her buddy. And how long did that take, Teresa? Maybe 2 or 3 minutes. She could have felt the pressure that people were waiting for her and anxious or getting chilly or whatever, but this is her moment, right? Mm-hmm. Here comes her buddy. Let's call him, I don't know, how about Rainey? And Rainey is also very nervous, because this is a pretty big hole in the bottom, and I'll make Rainey's story a lot shorter, because Rainey wants to get this over with. And how many of you have been there? I am so that person. Just get me in the dang boat, paddle in my hand. I want to take on fear, and it's been the wrong way for me different times. Rainey runs up, jumps over all the boulders, doesn't want to wait any longer. He's out of breath. He saw the rapid on the way up, but he didn't get different perspectives. He jumps in his boat. He takes off paddling like a madman. As he goes into the beginning of the rapid, he bumps a rock. Now he's kind of thrown off. Now he's against the right wall. Now he goes to set up for the boof. The stroke is not there because it hasn't been visualized. He goes into the hole, and what happens to his stern, and then what happens to and he's upside down. Now he's scrambling, pulls a skirt, paddle goes under a boulder, boat recovery. He's okay, but now we're looking at 20 minutes of paddle recovery or pulling out the spare paddle. And we have 2 really different experiences. And I didn't mention this earlier, but let's just say they have the same skill set. If they have the same physical skill set and the same experience on water, we would hope for a similar outcome, right? But one experience was really different. A person who decided to partner with the fear that they are dealt with. Let's go to the next slide. And I think this will go quick, because when you partner with fear, I talked about this, fear being a normal I might have talked about that fear being a normal thing. We're going out because many of us want to kind of feel, we want to feel the power of the river. That's kind of scary. I mean, if we don't think rivers are scary, we're probably in the wrong sport. And I talked about this, why we understand that was number one. I want to know why I do this. I want to have an accurate risk assessment. I brought that up to Rainey because I think this is one of the absolute keys to staying safe on the river. And if you can't assess yourself, I think it was Tony made a really nice comment. What if you see the person who just continues to push it and they're not skilled enough to be pushing it? I really think it's our responsibility as paddlers to politely try and have a dialogue with them. That's just so important. And it's not easy. We all know that, but it's important to like go to them with your, at least you've said your piece, and they might hear you, they might not, but and then this last one is trusting your skills. If you have, like Rainey said, if you've made, I say class 4 and class 3, because class 4 is pretty hard. If you've made hundreds and hundreds of class 4 moves in class 3, you should trust that when you go in. And if your body and mind are ready, you will likely make that move if you've prepared yourself. Okay, next slide. All right, are we ready? We've been sitting a long time. Stand up in your houses, do a couple of jumping jacks if you have to, because this question is for you. Get ready for the chat. Chat's about to blow up. Here we go. You are going to answer, if you want to answer like in a 3-part, 1, 2, and then 3 if you need it. I want to see what people out there have for when they experience their max fear. I'm going to give you an example. When I decide, the green trust still scares me. When I decide to run the green trust, the night before is when I feel the fear. It's not when I stand at upper zigzag. I've already made the decision. You're committed. I don't get any more scared at that point. But this is really different for everybody. Some people it's at the put in. Some people try and spit and they can't spit. Some people it's when they scout the big one. Everyone is really different on this one. To know when you get scared, I have literally lost sleep the night before runs because I decided to go do something and I'm just like a wreck. I don't know what to say about that, but so when is your time that you tend to experience the maximum fear that you have? I see some, great comments coming in. Cool. Watch those. Keep an eye on those. This is fun to see what other people's fear would be, and to know yourself, right? Okay. Watch for a couple more comments. I explained that one pretty well. If you're standing on a river and everyone decides to bail, you're probably going to have some fear if you go by yourself. Okay, number 2. What is it you're afraid of? This one to me seems more complex. I think there's more options here. So maybe don't put death because that one's kind of obvious, or maybe you're not afraid to die. I don't know. But is it social pressure to do something well? You can read all my notes. For me, I have a pretty bad back, and I am honestly afraid to break my back on the river. That's one I think about more than any other, is sitting there and I can't move my legs. It just is a raw fear I have. It's been a hard one to get over. So big drops are not as appealing to me at my age and my physical ability. So what are your things? Fun to see what people are putting in. Yeah, driving. I like that one. Whoever's a driving knows their odds. Good for you. I used to be afraid of big water, and now I've kind of come to love it. I was a rafter for lots and lots of years, so big water kind of meant like a big swim. But now in a kayak, it doesn't scare me. I have enough confidence in what I'm doing. Nice, Brad. Awesome. Isn't that everybody just being a beater? Awesome, you guys. Thanks for sharing those. I'm gonna have to go back and read these notes in a minute when I focus. Okay, finally, are there any other random factors for you? And I brought this one up on purpose. I've had people that I have been boating with, and what I found is a pattern of when I was with them, I did not feel safe compared to other people. And when I look back, it's really obvious because they don't seem to really have the energy that they put into looking out for other people. Perhaps they can't throw a throw bag to save their life. Perhaps they don't care about having the right gear. And maybe it's just their general attitude that they would rather take care of themselves. So the other factors, what are yours? For a while, mine was also like super cold water, even with a dry suit. Like Metolius run was like kind of made me nervous of like even a dry suit being super cold can take you out. So what are your other factors for you that lead to
People that don't
a
look
fear
back.
point. So fun. Okay, I haven't been able to look at them all. Hopefully you guys are kind of scrolling through the comments. Yeah, getting late in the day. It's huge. That's huge. All right. I think we might have, this might be our last slide. What's one more, maybe? One more slide?
One more. Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right, I've covered most of these. I have one though, that I might play you a song, because when it comes to these rituals, we talked about rehearsal and visualization. Take time to do that. I think it's easier for some people than others. Breathing, covered that, potentially with that evaluation. Okay, I'll explain this last one while I pull up my theme song. The lock-in. It's so common when we go off a drop that's a bigger drop or a horizon line, to essentially let our body go in a kayak. Fear has a way of kind of making your core go, oh, and then it kind of goes weak, and then you kind of go upside down like real quick. And so locking in has been one of the things for me as a kayaker that I'll focus on that, and usually things go pretty well. Locking in, if you don't know the term, it means pressing those balls, the balls of your feet on your bulkhead, jamming your knees up into those thigh hooks, flexing your core. It doesn't necessarily mean you lean forward, but you might have a slightly forward posture, and you lock that in and stay loose at the same time. It's a great skill to work on if you don't do that one. But the lock in through the entire rapid, start to bottom, is a way for me. I focus on that instead of the fear, and I believe I'm going to do it. And here's my theme song. Are you guys hearing that? Okay, I'll put it in the chat. I'll put the name of it in the chat. If you want to steal my theme song, awesome. Everyone should have a theme song you sing when you get nervous. My favorite one. All right, what do we got next?
Ritual. That's a nice ritual. Oh, I love it. Well, I just want to reinforce that this set of tools right here on this slide are the most useful ways to lower your fear level so that you can actually perform when it comes to paddling. And so if you have to pick the ones that work for you, but one part of it is to be embodied, to be in touch with your body, and his 4, 3, 2, 1 and becoming in touch with your senses is a way to come into your body. And the breathing, deep breaths and long exhales are a way to lower your stress levels immediately in any situation. And ritual, I know you guys have rituals. I do this thing where I dangle my hands in the river and I take some breaths and I look at the birds in the trees, and I have a certain set of things that I do before a big rapid. Do you guys want to tell us about your rituals? Lee or Rainey?
Go ahead, Rainey, if you have one or two.
No, definitely the song. Definitely, the song shifts though, depending on what I'm listening to.
Do you sing to yourself?
No.
Okay.
Once you get so for me, it's the visualization, it's the scenario planning, it's the decision making. Those are always part of a rapid. But when I'm partnering with fear, I found very simple thing that helps a lot, which is to physically smile, even when I'm terrified. I would tell people, I used to teach, I still teach things. I always have, whenever I'm focusing with someone, I say, we're going to focus on 3 things. First one is smile. Then I give them 2 other things to focus on. But in the moment, sometimes it can be really challenging. And I remember at one point, I was on a river's big hole. I was wanting to go into it, and I realized I was really tense. And I said, oh, I should do that thing I tell everybody to do. And so I was not feeling happy, like I wanted to smile, but I forced myself to smile. And, but it actually relaxed me, and I could feel my body relax, and I could feel my adrenaline kind of calm a bit. And it's a great physical intervention.
Laughing is
I also do that when I'm asking for a raise.
Lee, we just got a really good question. How do you distinguish between rational and irrational fear?
I saw that too. That is a great question. Jump in. I have an answer. I mean, I think I made a point a couple times of number one is what is your skill set? And it's kind of versus what you're trying to do. Okay. If your skill set is within the realm of a river or a rapid, and you're confident that it is, and you make your decision about fear, it should be a fairly rational fear discussion. So if I'm looking at a class 5, but I'm a class 3 paddler and I'm really, really scared, that's a very rational fear. Okay. If I'm a class 3 paddler and I'm running a class 3 and I know I can roll, but I'm still scared of this rapid, perhaps and if again, maybe not the worst outcome, but the most common outcome is something I can handle, then maybe I'm more into the irrational side of fear. You'd also want to ask yourself, where's the irrationality coming from for you? But I think it's those questions that I asked just about those 3 questions about where's your fear point? When does it happen? What are the fears? There you go. That can help you actually answer that question. I gave you the example for me, like if I'm scared of my back and I'm only running a 10-foot drop, well, maybe that's not irrational. I've had a broken back before. So, but I have to sort of cross-reference those 2 things. So is my fear rational? What are my odds of, that one's maybe not a good example. It's kind of unknown, but jump in if someone wants to share anymore.
Go, Darryl.
I would say all fear is irrational. The question is, do you want to act in the presence of fear? And you should make a rational decision about that. Because your feeling of fear is real, and it's real whether it's justified or not justified, and it's going to affect you whether it's justified or not justified. But by using these heuristics, and Rich and Lee and Teresa have already talked about quite a few of them, and so I won't repeat them, you can then decide, well, is this a fear I can partner with, or is this a fear I need to listen to when I make that rational decision? I think that I'll add a little bit to that, and I'll say that I use similar kind of similar device of decision making that's been described, but I really focus. And I think for people kind of learning to partner with their fear, a really good area to focus is on what are the consequences of messing up? What's the magnitude of loss, to use Rainey's actuarial reference. When I used to teach beginners, we get to a class 3 rapid at the end of the clinic, and I'd usually kind of try to create a space where people could run it or not. But I dealt with more than one person who, they were really anxious, and I knew they had the skills to do it. And I said, what's going on? And they said, well, I could miss this and I could miss that. And I'd say, well, what's going to happen if you miss that line, if you miss that stroke, what's going to happen? And they'd say, well, I'm going to flip. And I said, okay, what's going to happen? And I said, well, I'm probably going to miss my roll. I said, okay, what's going to happen? I said, well, I'm probably going to swim. I said, okay, and how do you feel about that? And I said, well, that's fine. I said, okay. And so I'm going. Right. So is that an irrational fear? No, it's a fear. So play with that. Like, what are the consequences? And I think that learning to be present with your fear, learning to understand it, to me, a lot of it's about practice. And if you start practicing with your fear in easier circumstances, then when you start to get into these objectively dangerous situations, you will have had the practice of how you relate to your fear. So I don't think you should ever ignore your fear, but you can override it, and it's good to practice doing so when the consequences are low.
Nice, well said. And I think the beauty of our, there has maybe some flaws, but our classifications of rapids, they kind of combine skill set and danger. There's probably, most people talk about rapids in the sense of both how dangerous it is if you are upside down or you're swimming, and also how difficult it is. So those experiences hopefully are good to you as you go up through classes, if that's your goal, to see where you can get to. So that the years of experience running, a little bit harder to run all the time, hopefully gets you that experience that Darryl's talking about in practice.
Yeah, this is going to come up again in flow.
I'll be much more brief, but Kay just put a question in. How do you deal with when the fear thing happens, overcoming that or moving forward? And
This slide right here.
yeah, we
Breathing,
talked a lot about
all that.
these things, and I think that, you know, part of it, and Lee, you spoke to this, but it's not on here, this particular slide. For me, part of that also is knowing your purpose. Like, why are you there?
Mhm.
And I've been paddling for 30 years and I've had different purposes. Like now, I just want to go on and have a good time with Teresa or whatever. And I don't really want to push myself anymore. There was a time when I wanted to go do expedition boating in the Himalayas and all that kind of stuff. And so I was literally, every time I was on the river, I was like, if there's a challenge and I can do it, I'm going to do it. I also was prepared to die. That was maybe crazy. I was 24, but for me, I wanted to become amazing. And that meant if I had the skills, I was going to do it. So you got to know your purpose. And that can be an underlying piece about whether you run a rapid or not.
I got one answer for K too. This
Yeah.
is when you know if you have a good crew or not, because if you have a good crew, they are going to do what it takes to take time with you to make sure you are potentially accessing these. Because guess what? When you're scared, we always forget. We all focus on the bad stuff. So your crew will hopefully eddy out with you. Take time, get out of your boat, get warm, and talk about if it's irrational or rational, and go through these exercises. So you'll know how good your crew is if you ever have to experience something like this.
Very true. All right, you guys ready to move on? Any more great questions in the chat? Moving on to flow. This is a photograph of Aniol Sarasoles running one of the many waterfalls he ran in December in Iceland. And when I see photographs of people running big drops, my question is always, can you spot your landing? Are you calm enough as you're going over the edge to take your stroke at the right moment? Because if you are, then you're probably in the flow. And if you don't have time, if it becomes a blur when you're going off the edge, then you're probably not in the flow. It happens way too fast when it's like that. So being in the flow is what allows him to do stuff like this under control. And this is our very own Darryl running a big drop in North Carolina, Gorilla. And do you want to tell us your story now?
Yeah, it'd be good timing because I got to get my kid over to.
We'd love to hear it. This is about being in the flow.
So very brief prelude. I wrote this for my children in case they ever grew up and I wasn't around from a kayaking accident. So it's a little morbid. But as we were planning for this, and I edited it down a little bit, but as we were planning for this, I was thinking, okay, fear I get, risk I get, flow, I don't know, what does that have to do with kayaking? I don't totally get what Teresa's going for there. And then I was thinking a little bit more about it, and I thought, well, I have this thing I wrote, and that's kind of about flow.
Totally about flow.
And then I looked at the slides that she's going to go through after this, and actually it's pretty much completely about flow. And for me, flow is why I kayak. It's whether it was in that time where I wanted to do really extreme things or now. It's always been about flow. So I'm going to read this to you. What is it that puts a human on the river? The step toward the river required no extra strength. There was no special resistance to overcome, no extra weight holding back the muscles. The effort was to move the mind forward. The mind has physical weight when you move into fear and exhilaration. My first time down a river, I feel like I'm heading into battle. Mind churning. What will the water bring? Will I react quickly enough? Will my body bend with the river? Will I seize in fear? Will I go rigid and topple? Will my lungs last? Will I find my courage? Will I find my flow? Stepping off dry land takes no special effort. Slipping onto the placid river no special skill. But ahead, liquid thunder. We have embarked voluntarily, free choice, but choices made, outcomes not so free. The sky becomes the mood. Sunny day on the new river with 8 feet of pile and 20-foot smile. The monstrous hole seems surreal set against the cheer of the summer sky. Yet, paddling the misty Chattooga under steel gray skies feels like walking through the gate to Hades itself. So why did I do this? Once in the boat, on the water, my mind settles and ceases. Visualization done. Decisions made. Die cast. Pure observation, pure sensation, pure focus. Moving my boat, my body, my mind, my very soul across the line. I sometimes left this world and entered infinity itself. Timelessness, cold water, feel the body, the river's force, still center amidst the noise and fury, speed as if I am the wind itself. And when the river grabs me, wit sharpened. Now I'm fighting with my brain, my emotional control. Fear is the enemy. No matter how high the wall of water, how violently I'm tossed, I let the beast flow through me and ride the wild buffalo to stillness. I can breathe and I can balance and I can find the weakness in this watery embrace and break free. It was not the adrenaline. It was not the test of skill and mind and body. It was not the feeling of dancing, not the edge of life and death. These were the tools for the prize. These were the price of admission. No, the prize was as simple and as profound as being with the river and knowing it. Because for the short while I was on the water, my boat, my body became a part of the river and its power. For those precious moments in the flow, my soul would occupy river time, and I would exist simultaneously and at once across the span of millions of years. A drop of water swirling in the river. No border between that drop and the river, between me and the water. Insignificant in ourselves, yet the river, the world, the universe itself does not exist without us. The river is nothing but countless drops upon drops upon drops. We are one. I am without borders, without distinction, and yet I'm everything. So this is why I did it, to expand beyond my walled off body and, if only for a few moments, to become one with the world around me. There was rarely chatter paddling across the lakes once the water had stopped. We were still, reflecting on what had been, reflecting on what is, reflecting on the water. Thanks for letting me share that with you all. It's special to me.
Wonderful. You bring tears to my eyes. Well, it's profound for all of us that have had this experience. And I'm going to go into a little bit about how you end up in this state and sort of what it's like beyond what Darryl has said. He's captured the soul of it. It's an ecstatic experience, right? It's a unity experience, but it has its risks. So just the basics here. It's part of all of our wiring. All of us are set up to do the transitions in our brain that it takes to reach this state. And when you're in this state, you're going to be happy. It's a blissful state of consciousness. And it happens when you're absorbed in any task that requires your continuous attention. So you have to be focused on it and absorbed in it. And it has to be providing you with constant feedback. So it won't happen on a long pool unless you're trying to paddle across that pool, because you have to have a clear objective in order to reach this state. But once you're in it, then the brain does its thing. It's been well shown to be alpha theta brainwave state. Cats are in alpha state all the time, that sort of diffused consciousness that cats have. And theta is a very relaxed and attentive state of mind as well. Before Csikszentmihalyi, the Hungarian-American psychologist who named it flow, before he named it flow in the 70s, people were calling it a peak experience or being in the zone. And it had a bunch of other names based on the pursuit involved. I think the improv comedians call it being in the forever box. And jazz musicians call it being in the pocket. Bye, Darryl. Thank you. So the flow is something that humans have known about in every culture for a really long time. And it's only just been since the 70s that it got the name flow. Some examples of people who are in the flow: when a basket player is hot, when they're hitting every basket, they're definitely in the flow. A golfer that, you know, is sinking that little ball in the pocket every time. A skater that's making all of their jumps and all those twists. What they discovered from checking the brain waves on lots of different people is that Tibetan Buddhist monks meditating 30 years can go into a flow state just by wanting to, just by meditating for a moment, but it takes them 30 years to get to the point when they can do that. So it's not something you can do meditating quickly. It's a very slow process. I was thinking as I was watching the Alpinist a second time, that heavy duty doing his hula hooping in the parking lot with Marc-Andres joining him. They were accessing the flow by playing with hula hoops. You can do it surfing a wave. Pat Metheny has a wonderful YouTube recording about how he does improvisational jazz, and he speaks about music as a language, and you can only improvise in that language if you're fluent, if you speak that language. And the same is true for paddling. That's where we'll get to the skill part. Aniel Sarasole is running waterfalls. Oh, Denny, on our way back from the river the other day, Denny was telling me, and I don't know if he's here right now, but he's telling me about back in the day when he used to play croquet and he was good, and he would get in the flow and he would run the court. He would totally own it. Every shot, he would make every single shot, and nobody could stop him. It got to where nobody in the Portland area would play with him. That's how good he was. So our own Denny accessed the flow playing croquet. And any of us, if you're surfing on a wave and it feels great and you're paying attention and you know what you're doing, you get there. I bet you know the feeling. Or when you nail your line, it's right there. The flow is right there. And one of the things they found by studying this is that people who have more flow in their life are the happiest people on the planet Earth. And when those same people that have the most flow, their goal in life is to have more flow. That's their project. That's what they're working on, all of them. So those of us who are addicted to whitewater paddling, we may be in that boat as well. I see Aniel over there. Yeah, he sees us landing. I'm sure he does. So about going to church, you know, we joke about the river being church, but if you're finding moments of flow when you're out there, then you're having this experience of unity consciousness, of being one with everything, one with the river, one with the eagles, one with your best friend. And it's a spiritual experience. It's wonderful. And I think it's part of the reason why paddling buddies stay buddies forever. You know, why is Rainey still in my life? after all these years? It's because we shared these experiences on the river. Oh yeah, characteristics of flow. So these are all based on research. This is not my opinion. Complete concentration or absorption in the task is one of the absolute essentials. I can't let him in. You have to have clear goals. You have to be doing something. If you're just floating along, if you're just waiting to see what the river is going to do to you, you're not accessing the flow. You actually have to have a goal. You have to have a project. And it's better if the river is slapping you back, if the river's doing something. If it's flat water, it's harder to get that immediate feedback. The transformation of time. I have had some experiences in recent years where time slowed down dramatically. And all of a sudden I could see every drop of water, every glint of sunlight, every leaf. You know, it's just like suddenly nothing is happening except for this rapid that's right in front of you. And it makes it easy because you feel like you have so much time. You have so much time to do everything you need to do. And you're just waiting until you can see the next wave so that you know how to angle into the next thing. So it's very different when time starts doing that. The other extreme of time is when you get immersed in some project and all of a sudden half the day is gone and you didn't even notice. That also happens. That's also the flow. It's intrinsically rewarding. The psychologists have a word for it. Can't think of it. I call it addictive because people that find this thing, they keep coming back to it. It feels easy. This number 7 is very important. The balance between the challenge and the skill is a prerequisite for flow. It has to be hard or else you won't be that engaged, right? It has to be hard enough to demand all of your attention. But not too hard. You have to be able to do it. You have to feel a sense of agency in that you can do it. The number 8, no self-conscious rumination. You basically, what happens is your prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain, just shuts off. And that's where personality is. That's where planning is. That's where all those nagging, guilty things about the past are. That's where time goes away, is when the prefrontal cortex shuts off. And it also shuts off your inner critic. There's nobody is saying you're doing this wrong. It's just you flowing. Oh yeah, and number 10, it sticks in your memory. Whenever it does happen, you tend to notice. Yeah. This graphic is just to illustrate sort of all the different relationships of challenge to skill. If you're over there on the bottom left corner where you don't have much skill and it's not very hard, then you're not likely to care. And in the opposite corner where the flow is, it's your skill level is high and the challenge is high. That's when flow happens, when you're actually good at something and you're working at your capacity. That's where flow is. This is a slide to point out that when you're learning a sport or anything really, it's not just sports, you go through a series of steps where at the very beginning on the left, you see unconscious incompetence. You don't know what you don't know. You have no idea even what there is to know. That's unconscious incompetence. And then when you find out what it is that you don't know, that's when you have conscious incompetence. And as you work on it, let's say you haven't got a role yet, but you want to learn to roll, you work on it, and eventually you get to conscious competence. You have a role and you know you can roll. And then the very last stage, unconscious competence, that's where our friend Marc-Andres stayed. That guy was a wizard of rock climbing and ice climbing and snow climbing and reading avalanches and reading cornices. And he had an awareness of what was happening in the mountains to the extent that he was able to not die for a long time, considering the number of risks that he took. So this is basically review for what we've already said, but how to get in the flow. You practice until you have unconscious competence. You have to be good at it. You have to really be good at it, and you don't get good at it without putting in the time. So you have to decide ahead of time what your risk tolerance is and take only the risks that you can tolerate. and that you only take the challenges that you think you can do, that you can succeed at. And in whitewater, I would say there's a little exception, because if flipping over is not a failure, right? You can roll up, it's not a big deal, or you can self-rescue, it's not a big deal most of the time. But when it's time to actually try to transition from fear to flow, you have to have a plan, you have to have a goal, objective, you have to get your body to chill out, you have to pay a lot of attention to exactly what it is you're doing, and then you just trust that you have the skills and go. 4 steps. When you're in the flow, you're taking in a lot more information than you usually do, because your frontal brain is not talking. So all you're doing is you're listening to all of your senses. You're paying attention to every little thing. And your ability to recognize patterns is through the ceiling. So let's say reading water is the task at hand. You've been on the river X many hours in your life. All of those hours, everything you learned from every moment that you were on the water gets applied when you're in the flow. So your water reading is better. You can be creative, because that guy in your head that says you're doing it wrong just isn't there. And then lateral thinking is when you can pull in ideas from different bodies of knowledge. So you don't just think about boating, you think about everything that you know from every part of your life can come in when you're in the flow. We talked about the time alteration, we talked about the relax and calm, and there's just a sense that you know what to do. You don't have to think about it, you just know. This is about rolling. Situational awareness is the ability to absorb information accurately, assess it calmly, and respond appropriately. Essentially the ability to keep cool when all hell breaks loose. And when you flip over in whitewater, that's what it feels like the first, 100 times ish. There's Darryl again. This is a quote I just pulled after watching the movie a second time. He was talking about how he was getting from fear to focus. When you encounter a situation, I can't see the whole screen of my own, but you say, okay, this is real. I can either keep it together or I can blow up, I can lose it, I can fall apart, have a meltdown. And he says, you've got to do one or the other. And that process of evaluating the situation and then getting it together and carrying on is a challenge every single time. That's what Marc-Andres said. He was right. Made it to the takeaways. Rainey, you want to run us through a summary of what you think are the important things about risk?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess the most succinct takeaway is just being a little more conscious about risk, thinking about how to make good, accurate risk assessments, both probability, magnitude, relationships, thinking about your risk tolerance, and then avoiding these sort of behavioral patterns of thinking that can get in the way of accurate risk assessments. The normalization of deviance and the heuristic traps that we talked about.
Yeah. Cool. And then fear, Mrs. Lee.
Okay. If you've been someone who has, maybe you didn't realize it, but your attitude was to move through fear quickly, or avoid fear, or conquer fear, I would challenge you. And you don't have to even be on the river for this. We all know, we do a lot of other things that involve fear. I would ask you to move into it and partner and work with it, as we talked about a little bit. I think we can all be challenged in that a little bit, or a lot in my case. And then just understanding your fear, taking time to think about when you're not scared of why. I just debriefed with a person about some fear they experienced, and it was really healthy for them to talk about it, not bottle it up, not say like, I'm a wimp because I felt it. It's just not true. So just really be open and honest with yourself, and find people you trust, maybe to even to share with, especially if it's kayaking and they know kayaking, you're going to get good support. And then finally, practice this stuff. And I think, not to steal Teresa's point here, but with flow, is some of the examples that Teresa gave for flow, and they're true, but it takes hours. It takes thousands maybe of hours to be able to get into flow states quickly. And I don't know about you guys, but I still think kayaking is very difficult. It's one of the most difficult things I've ever done. And I've done a lot of sport and outdoor sport and kind of tried everything. And kayaking is, I think that's why I like it. It's so tough. So I don't find flow as quick as I want to in kayaking, if I'm really honest. So things like yoga, and I'm not saying yoga is easy, yoga is hard too, but I can get into a flow state using mindfulness or yoga and know what I'm looking for and experience it potentially quicker in those states. If kayaking is still like a lot of fear, but I do think there's a crossover where experiencing flow state and then go kayaking, you got to tackle some fear. If you understand flow state, that will help you out. So hope that helps.
Yeah, fascinating. All right, last one. This set of words on the first sentence: risk drives focus and focus drives flow. It's possible to access flow without taking great risks, but in adventure sports and extreme sports, there are a lot of people who use risk to access flow. They put themselves in life-threatening situations routinely. And I think that Marc-Andre might have been one of them, that the reason why he did what he did was because he was accessing the flow state, because he was highly skilled, and he was able to reach this state, which is so addictive. So what my point here is, one, to try to keep you safe in spite of the seductive nature of the flow state. You must, if not dying is on your list of things to do, right? As it is mine, I'm trying to stay alive. You start with your risk tolerance. You decide on your risk tolerance and you assess the risk and your skills before you ever start on a run or on a rapid. You do that before, because once you are in a flow state, it's too late to do that stuff. That stuff is done with your conscious brain, and you need that too. And then once you've decided to accept a challenge, that's when you focus and do all the things that you know that will allow you to go into that high performance, creative, fluid state that we call flow. That's it. Ready for questions, comments?
Well, I would like to offer the first comment, which is just a huge thank you to Teresa and her panelists. This talk, as with all the safety talks, was fantastic. And Teresa, we usually try to keep these talks to about 75 minutes, but we were all just hanging on your every word. We're at, an hour and a half at this point, and everyone's here because they want to be. But I would say to folks, if you're anxious about the time and you were worried about seeming rude, don't worry about seeming rude. If you need to go, by all means go. But if you want to hang out for a little bit of Q&A, I'm guessing that Rainey and Lee and Teresa, you guys have a few more minutes.
Sure.
Okay. I saw, and I don't know if Paul Kuthi is still with us, but poor Paul, he had a question way back.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. I knew we would find a moment for it. We could start with that one.
It's all good.
Yeah,
I just run into that quite a lot. And I just, as it relates to skills and to equipment, people pick up a new skill, they pick up a new, like, fancy, shiny, full face helmet, and suddenly feel more emboldened, just basically bringing their risk level right back to where it was previous to learning the skill or having the new shiny equipment. And I always have trouble explaining it or knowing what to do with that in the in the moment on the river with your friends.
Yeah, there's a name for it in the heuristic world. It's called risk compensation. Whenever there's something that lowers your risk, then if you're in it for the excitement, then you do something else to bring your risk level right back up.
Yeah. And just to link my final thought on this is an appreciation for, I think part of the way we address that is giving people the skills like this that you're providing right here, learning more about how do you address the mental game of the sport, which we all would agree, the mental game is so important for kayaking, but it's so under addressed and coached and talked about. And so I just want to say thanks for both the panelists and to the club and to you guys for organizing. Right on. Good job.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I thought that risk homeostasis is a really cool concept. I think the question is the mitigation balanced with the risk, the new risk, it's individual judgment about, what type of risk that person is going to accept. But sometimes the mitigation, like, hey, if I wear a full face helmet, then I can run class 5, or I can run this drop. And it's not really, you're not really compensated. It's not an accurate compensation for the risk you're accepting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Darryl. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Paul, I saw your question earlier and been thinking about it kind of since you wrote it. I'll break down what you said just slightly further, which is, you mentioned these tools are helpful. I think depending on the gear or the skill, really going back to Rainey's model of probability and magnitude of loss is the way to go. So, you might have a new or maybe not so new, creek boat that auto boofs and punches through holes, and that's going to, compared with old boats, that's going to increase or decrease the probability of an accident, but it doesn't change the magnitude of the potential loss. And so focusing on that can be helpful. Conversely, that face helmet that is going to affect the magnitude of loss if you're going to bang your face into a rock, but it's not necessarily going to affect the probability of messing up. So kind of focusing on what the mitigation thing is can help be analytical about, well, how much is it helping? What is it helping? Versus, well, I've got this helmet, now I can do anything, or I've got this new boat and I can run anything. I think that's where these tools really, really, really become helpful. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I'm looking at the comments and I see Terry asking, when you have found flow state, can you use that memory when you're on the water? And I would say that for me, at least, when I have had the flow experiences on the water, it almost always comes after I have invested the time in intentionally relaxing and focusing. Like if I almost have to do a meditation before a rapid in order for me to be able to enter it. So I have to put in the work up front. The partnering with my fear is one way of saying it. See.
What they're learning, just piggyback on that, what they're learning is being in a flow state is essentially a shortcut for those 10,000 hours required to be a master at something. So every time you're in a flow state, your absorption of material and learning multiplies.
Right, you're learning much faster than you normally would. They're saying, what is it, the 10,000 hour rule is getting cut into a quarter of that or something if you can access flow state while playing with a new skill.
Teresa and crew, I see Sam has got his hand raised, and I don't think, Sam, you're muted. Did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, speak, Sam.
Okay. Yeah, I would. I want to draw a distinction, and I'm thinking about this climber we saw about extreme sports. Extreme sports, to me, the definition is you fail, you die. Basically, you fall, you die, you fail, you die. And there's this line that, I would never cross, and so when I think about what extreme sports are to me, it means you don't really have any options if you fail, and if you're skydiving or if you're this guy up, a few thousand feet without any ropes, you make a mistake and you're going to die. So when I think about my kayaking or the risks I'm taking, part of my calculation it's that question that, I forget if it was Darryl or who is saying, so what's going to happen if this happens? What's going to happen if that happens? It's like, I go into these things and I go, is my skill level at a level where if I screw up, I'm going to come out of this okay, even in the worst case. I mean, obviously there's a worst case in even a minuscule rapid that something goes terribly wrong and you die, but that happens when you get in your car too. But that's what I do. And I think it comes right back to your skill level, right? So if you're very skillful, you have more options than if you're less skillful.
Mhm.
And I'm coming back into kayaking after doing my 10,000 hours, 20 years ago. And so I'm assessing maybe more carefully than I used to. And my final thing is I'm really thankful to this club and to Teresa and the group, because they're very good at helping you assess what you're ready to do. And I think that's really, really important, to have a group around you that isn't social pressure at all. The only social pressure is, am I up for this? No, I don't think you are. Or yes, this is a river you should do. It's right at the edge of your level, like the white salmon was last summer for me. So anyway, so I don't admire this climber, the 25-year-old climber who died. I mean, I think, I admire him because I think he's like Jesus Christ. He's like this creature that comes out of nowhere and lands on the earth and does these incredible things. But he's not a normal person. He's not like the rest of us. And he knew he was going to die, and his girlfriend didn't. And it's so sad that she didn't. I know someone who's related to John Krakauer, and he doesn't have kids because he doesn't want to have kids who lose their father, because he knows when he goes out, he may die.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the sport I'm practicing. Mm-hmm. But it is what some people do. And anyway, yeah, I'll leave it there.
And it's a personal choice.
Yes, no, it is, right.
Yeah, because it's.
How do you want to live? How do you want to die? Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to live in the flow state, that's for sure.
As much as possible. Sex is a good way to get there.
Okay, Teresa. I was going to say, I want to live in the flow state.
After hours.
And part of being in the flow state is honestly having all these conversations with the likes of you. So I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank our participants, because if you weren't showing up every other Thursday for our safety talks or every other Tuesday for our takeout talks, we wouldn't be doing them. And every single one of us on the board at the Lower Columbia Canoe Club and all the club members, we're learning just as much as everybody else. So thank you so much for participating. If you were here with us tonight, we've got your email address, which means when the recording is available, we'll email it back out to everyone. And it also means you're already registered for the next safety talk, which will take place in 2 weeks. And that one's on shoulders. And every single safety talk is excellent. So if you liked this one and you love your shoulders, we'll see you in 2 weeks. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Yes, and thank you so much to my panelists. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Teresa. Thanks you, everybody. It was great.
Good night, everyone.
Yes, thank you all for coming.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
And Darryl, that poem, I'm going to transcribe that. That was
You
amazing.
read me the long version today while I was walking. It made me cry again.
Be happy to send it to you if you if that's probably easier than transcription. So
I would love that, Darryl. Please do. And if you don't mind, I would
include
include
it to the club blog.
Yeah.
Sure, that's fine. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, Teresa, can you send me her email, or
yeah,
and I'll send it back to you. And I joined your club, so I'm on your list now.
Woo-hoo!
I decided to pay.
Well, then
You
I
guys are so
have
great.
your email, don't I? That's awesome.
Yeah, you can send me your email directly.
Yeah. All right. Thanks,
Lee.
everyone.
Rich, we got to get on the water, man.
Huh?
Oh, I said, Rainey, we got to get on the water. I thought he was still there, but maybe he's not.
Yeah, he's his time is tight. He's kids and wife and job and yeah. But yeah, we should go paddling soon. Bye,
All right.
everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Teresa.
Awesome club.
Sign off.
Bye, John. Really.
And now.